Welcome to Canadian Agriculture Unpacked, brought to you by Footprint. As usual, you will see our contact information on the screen. Please contact us if you would like to talk about an issue we've covered, if you would like us to talk about an issue we haven't covered, and if you would like to appear as a guest on our show. Today, I've got back with us Jack Wilkinson, a tour de force in Canadian agricultural policy, former Canadian Federation of Agriculture president, former president of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, and former president of the International Federation of Agricultural Producers, and currently a director on Canadian Cooperatives. It's a pleasure also for me to introduce our special guest today, Roger Chevraux from Alberta, a canola producer from Alberta. He's the former chair of the Canadian Canola Growers Association. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you very much.
You know, Roger, the more I look at the canola industry, the more I'm amazed at what has happened over the span, and you can tell us about this later, but what has happened over the span of time since canola was introduced. I mean, the growth, and you've got your fingers in almost every aspect of agricultural services as well. So before we talk about what is happening with tariffs in China and the U.S., could you tell us a little bit about your industry?
Well, it certainly, like you said, has grown since its inception from rapeseed into canola, which was a Canadian invention. They removed glucosinolates and uric acid from rapeseed through a standard breeding process many, many years ago. And from that, we've developed canola. So canola meaning Canadian oil. And it has been recognized as one of the top products, vegetable oils around the world, and it's a highly sought after product in many countries. So China, Japan, United States, Pakistan, Mexico are some of our largest customers.
And
And it really has grown to being one of our major suppliers of cash flow. It's the largest crop that we grow here in Western Canada, volume or dollar wise. I think the latest estimates I heard was it represented about $43.8 billion worth of economic activity in the Canadian economy. And that's not just at the farm gate, but that's all the way through the industry, right up to processing, creating oil, creating meal. So it's a very important commodity that we grow in Western Canada. And it's, like I said, it's one of the biggest cash flow products that we have. And a lot of farmers rely on it for profitability more than anything else that they grow.
yeah, you know, and $43 billion in economic activity. You're looking probably at about 13 billion in farm gate receipts. You're looking at 206,000 jobs, 16 billion in wages. It certainly has an impact. And of course, we've all flown across Western Canada during canola season when it's flowering, and all you see is yellow. It's quite an amazing sight to see. But Jack, one thing I did not realize is that canola is growing right across Canada, and you say it's growing in your area as well?
Yeah, we're very, very similar climatic and agronomically as the prairie provinces. We're much more, and in other ways too, we're much more similar to the West than we are to Southern Ontario. So it's been a major crop in our area as well. Um, it's not quite as large as some of the others because we do have some really good soybean varieties that we're now getting out of Manitoba and other areas that fit this area well. Southern Ontario, as we were chatting before we went online, have started to grow winter canola again. It used to be grown there probably 20 years ago, had some white mold problems over the winter time, kind of fell out of favor, but it's coming back on again strong now. Winter canola, as you'll know, Bob, is grown in France and a lot of European countries. It's a better, higher yielding, as usually all winter varieties of things are. And so it will work very interesting with the double cropping in southern Ontario. Some of the counties that are close to the U.S., they'll grow winter canola, they'll pull that out, and they'll grow a second crop. So it will add some diversity in that area for sure. So it's a growing crop, but it's not as large. And we've also have some canola in the Maritimes and Quebec as well.
You know, the other thing, Roger, and you can probably answer this. Other countries still call it rapeseed, don't they?
Some countries do, depending upon whether or not it's removed the glucosinolates or the uric acid. China, for example, still grows the traditional rapeseed. It doesn't have that attributes that we have. So yes, that is true. Like I said, canola was uh, an invention in here in Canada through our breeding processes. It really did improve the quality of the oil and the meal that we derive from the canola seed. And as a result, that's hence the name canola came from Canadian oil. So it's definitely a Canadian um, success story, I would say, more than anything here in Canada for sure. And
Well,
you're right, it is expressed. When I was over in China a year ago, and we really had to teach a lot of the Chinese dairy industry to understand that canola was different than their homegrown rapeseed because they still have the glucosinolates and uric acid. So they had to be careful with their rations, with the domestic supply of rapeseed in China. Whereas with the canola, they didn't have that restrictions, and it took a little while to kind of get them to understand that, and it was a growing market for us.
Bob,
am I
you'll
right in,
remember after
go
the
ahead, no, go ahead.
WTO. No, you'll remember when the WTO was wrapped up, some of the conversations in Europe, and they allowed to put caps on some production commodities, but rape was really allowed, probably not open ended, but an awful lot of that was grown and went into the biodiesel industry. So they really used the ability to put rape, crush it, and use it for that. Probably some canola would be used too, but rape seemed to be the crop that they were using at the time period, and that really allowed an opportunity for those European farmers to pull away from surplus crops, put something into the biodiesel industry, and it really, as you know, with the biodiesel industry in Europe at that time period, I mean, it was everywhere. I mean, diesel cars, taxis, plus the trucks. It was a major, major environmental fuel.
Am I right in saying, Roger, that it was discovered by Agriculture Canada research efforts and not by a private company? So there wasn't any proprietary ownership of the product?
That's correct. That's my understanding. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so go ahead.
Doctor Downey, I think, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Yeah,
So we've talked about the 43 billion, 43.8 billion in economic activity, which, as I said earlier, you've got your finger in everything. You've got the farm gate, first of all, transportation, processing, elevation, biofuel, livestock benefits, and then, of course, the market end uses. So your activity is prolific everywhere. So, and of course, that just means that if there's something that impacts the industry, it impacts a broad array of sectors in the industry. So let's talk about tariffs. I'm sure there's been a lot of discussion in your organization, Roger, about the impact of tariffs. How should we respond? Give us a bit of an overview of what you think the impact, and perhaps already just tariffs looming. Well, with China, they're not looming anymore, but with the U.S., at least, I think they're still looming. That probably has had an impact already. Give us a little picture of what's happening there.
well, maybe the best thing to do is just to start off by discussing a little bit about what size of the markets the U.S. and China represents to the Canadian farmer. The China market is they're our number two customer. They represent about $5 billion worth of products that they import from us. Most of that in their case is seed. Secondly, by meal, they're actually our second largest customer for meal, and a very very small amount of oil. So it's primarily the seed, raw seed by itself, or the meal that we get from our industry and our crushing facilities that we've started to create here in Canada. The Americans are our number one uh, customer that we have, and their sales represent about $8 billion to our industry annually. And most of that is in either the form of meal or oil. They do buy a little bit of seed, but it's the derivatives mainly. So that's where a lot of our crushing facilities in Western Canada have been ordered or have been on the books to be built or are in the process of being built. A lot of that was to go down into the U.S. If you take a look at our third largest customer, that's either Japan or Mexico, depending upon the year, and they represent about a billion to a billion and a half. So there's a real separation between the number one and two to our number three customer. So it's a very significant event when we start having our two largest customers, especially that large, talking about having tariffs on our main product here. So already we are starting to see a decline in price. On the markets, I think it's come down around $2 or $2.50 per bushel in the last couple of weeks, simply because of the scares that are in place and the damage that tariffs do to the entire industry. We export about 90% of our product that we make here in Western Canada, so we're very reliant upon exports. And exports, of course, work best when we have rules-based trading, and internationally accepted rules that everyone can accept the fact that when it leaves the port, it will be arrived and accepted based upon the rules of the trade. So anytime you throw in tariffs and you create uncertainty, then that creates some issues in there. So it's really an opportunity. We may end up losing markets. We may end up seeing people having a reduction in their cash flow, ultimately all from the stem of a decrease in the prices that we're receiving. So it's a very, very concerning thing at this moment in time for sure. And certainly has some big ramifications to us as Western producers and even Eastern producers, I hear.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Jack.
yeah, thanks, Bob. So it's my understanding right now China has not put a tariff on raw seed. Is that correct? And I
Correct.
guess to that end, what's the implications and what is the concern? It's still, I guess, under investigation, if I understand it correctly.
Correct. So what they have done is they've announced the tariffs, the 25% tariffs on, sorry, 100% tariffs on oil and meal, and that's the anti-discriminatory challenge that they have. We are still waiting to hear the outcome of the anti-dumping investigation they have, and the anti-dumping is on the seed. So we haven't heard the end of what could potentially come out of China yet. So was a real concerted effort on the way of the industry and on the Canadian government to put up some defense to that process, to the anti-dumping investigation, and I think China's still mulling over the information that was sent over to them. So that we've challenged it in the WTO, and the process requires that Canadian stakeholders acknowledge who they are to the Chinese, and then submit in a big long questionnaire, which occurred in the month of October, and finalized the questionnaire. We sent it all back in the beginning of November, and that included the industries. So a lot of our exporters. It included the Canadian government. It included farmers. There were 7 across Western Canada. I'm one of the 7 that took the time to fill out all of the questionnaires that the Chinese had, and that's a significant cost to the industry to defend that, and to the Canadian government to defend it. So the information's there. We don't know specifically what the government of China is going to do with it right now, if they're still mulling it over, but they have not said what their decision is right now. So this is 2 different situations is what we've got: an anti-discriminatory tariff, which is in place, and now we're waiting for the anti-dumping
You
investigation.
see, and that's exactly what irks me about this whole thing, because I mean, China at least was going through the motions of staying within WTO parameters and protocol when they did the anti-dump, right? You have to do an analysis, you have to demonstrate harm to the industry. So they were at least going through the motions. How they would have treated a ruling at the WTO if it went against them, that's another story. But at least they were doing that. But then they see Trump doing what he did, and I think China just became impatient and said, "Well, if the U.S. can do it, why don't we slap on a tariff as well?" Oh, go ahead.
Well, the anti-discriminatory was also started in September of 2024, as far as I know. It wasn't one that kind of got the headlines as much. So I think this did catch us a little bit off guard, but my understanding was they did actually start that process in 2024 as well. So they still are following the rules. Like I agree, they're probably watching what's happening with Trump right now and all of his uh, changing of his mind on an hourly basis, and watching to see what the results of that will be. But certainly
Well,
that is something that we're concerned about for sure.
at least Trump did say, well, for the moment, everything that trades within CUSMA, okay, we'll accept it, because, of course, that was a wonderful trade agreement when he signed it, which apparently now is garbage.
The greatest deal ever signed, as I recall hearing the
Exactly.
quotes.
Is there still an embargo on the 2 companies in Canada from the Yowie fallout?
No, they have full access to or they did. They had full access to the Chinese market. They had completely recovered from that. That was completely finished.
Go ahead, Jack.
A curiosity about what's happening with biodiesel. or biofuels in general. I believe I read an article that Federated has put its plant on hold, and the concern over what's happening in the U.S. on biofuels. Do you have a sense of that? I mean, is it all related to the U.S. pulling back from its environmental positioning on a number of these things, or is there something more behind it? And I guess what opportunity does it give you? Is that really a market that you can expand into?
I think it is one that we certainly can expand into in the long run. There certainly was some changes to it. It was a change in the way that the blending credits were going,
Yep.
that had occurred down south. It's now a producer blend or producer credit rather than a blender's credit. And it was a change. I think that the legislation is called a 45Z is what they changed. So it doesn't right now qualify canola as being a feedstock in that market as it stands. But that's a place where I think we've got opportunities to work with the U.S. government to make that maybe back again or to gain that again. So certainly that has had some impact on the exporting market. I'm not sure about the California market and whether or not that also has impacts on that or not. And that's the large one right now, the California market. Certainly there was some acceptance to the canola before. I think those are some of the things we got to negotiate in the next few years with the U.S. Domestically, though, there's quite a bit of investment that has occurred in around Edmonton. The Imperial Oil has created a refinery which they're planning on hopefully opening and starting production here in the next few months, and turning canola oil directly into renewable diesel. And my last estimates I heard was that would require about enough canola that is produced on about 2.5 million acres. So it's a sizable market for us in Western Canada. It does not replace the size of the market we potentially will lose out of China and out of the U.S. if we do have tariffs, but it is a good step, and we certainly are trying to encourage the governments at all levels, provincial and federal, to put more assurances to the industry that biofuels are here for the long term, and that there's a stable market here. And I think that's important for us to see continued investment into our industry.
You know, one of the things that Jack and I always dealt with at the Canadian Federation of Agriculture was that we implored the government not to trade off one commodity for another. And outside of that, not to trade off agriculture for another industry. My question is, did the government not see it coming, given the experience they had with having the Yahweh executive under house arrest? Then China retaliated on canola. Did they not see this coming when they put 100% tariff on electric vehicles? Roger, go ahead.
Well, I don't want to speak for the government because I can't, I wasn't involved in the cabinet or within their conversations. I mean, history would suggest it's a possibility, but whether or not they actually recognize it in advance, I don't know. But it certainly, I think, has been a direct result of it as a result. But I don't know whether they expected it or not, whether that was even in consideration. I wasn't there. I can't speculate on that part of it for sure.
Jack, what do you think?
And it is.
Go
No,
ahead.
go
No,
ahead.
sorry, finish.
Oh,
I was just going to say, I do agree with you though, Bob. I think it's very frustrating, and that's one of the things that we need to make the government recognize that this is a direct result of our actions that we made against the electric vehicles and steel and aluminum against China, and that it shouldn't be on the backs of farmers. It was decided for the public good of the Canadian economy. They wanted to support an industry, and also to support the American industry, primarily, I think, more than anything. And since the Americans don't seem to be recognizing the sacrifices that we made, that also frustrates me a little bit as well. But if it's for the public good that we decide to support an industry, and I'm all in favor of Canada supporting its economy, but the bill shouldn't be paid by farmers. It should be paid for by the public. In other words, the public treasury should be paying for that. So they should, if we get right down to it, one of the three things that we are really asking the Canadian government to do is to pay the farmers for the damages that are being done, and pay the farmers for the amount of money that we are spending to support this industry and to defend this industry, because we know that our trading practices are rules-based and on-side. So the farmers need to be compensated for their losses, and that's in the name of billions of dollars, we also know that that doesn't mean that they should support us in more loans. It's really hard to pay back a loan when you're losing money on a commodity. So lending me more money isn't the answer. If they're gonna support an EV industry and our steel and aluminum industry, then they need to support us with our losses. And we're talking, several billions of dollars of that damage that could occur from that.
Well said, Roger. And I know that anybody that watches this show, you're going to have the farmers applauding for you. Jack, you'd add something
Well,
to that?
a similar line. I mean, I think it's fair to say that if we hadn't moved on the EV, we would have had trade problems with the United States at the time period. They were already complaining about third-party entry of China products coming through Mexico into the U.S. market. The U.S. put the 100% on. And again, I'm not in the room, never was asked my opinion, but I think we would have been in a very difficult spot if we just had left that at zero. So whether the consequences had been all thought out, I would hope people around the table knew the impact and talked about the impact. I do appreciate the fact that some federal people that are running are saying that all of the tariffs that are collected will be put in a pot and they'll be used for compensation of industries and people that are affected negatively by this trade war. So I'm totally in support that we should be pushing the federal government very hard for direct payments to producers that are going to be negatively impacted by this, because there's nothing we can do as individuals. There's only so much, and it'd be interesting of Roger's thoughts on this, how much acreage can be diverted at this kind of time period in the prairies. When you've got price signals that are this bad, not everybody can walk away from producing canola. I mean, a farmer has a rotation. There'll be a bit of movement, but there'll only be so much. I don't know if you've got thoughts on this, Roger, as to what early indications are or not.
Well, I think you're right on, Jack. I mean, it's really at this point in time really difficult to sort of change direction too much. I'm sure there'll be a few quarters that are a few acres here and there where people have some, some room to move or jiggle a bit. But the other thing is you got to find a commodity that also is paying more than canola. And the problem is a lot of the commodities themselves have declined outside of canola just as well. There was tariffs that were slapped on some of the other things in agriculture as well from the Chinese. So I don't follow those particular markets, but I would say that there's a lot of things that have slid over the last couple of years. And the challenge always is at this point in time, we've got, southern Alberta that's probably about maybe 3 weeks away from actually putting seed in the ground. Most of those guys have their fertilizer in the bins, they have their seed in their shops, they have their, the drills lined up, they're getting ready to go. A lot of that is really hard to sort of turn that big ship around in the last minute. So, um, I think it's not going to have a massive impact on the amount of acres that are put in this year. And I think most farmers are really hoping that there's going to be some calmer heads prevail, and we're going to find our way to negotiate something out of both of these arrangements, both the U.S. and China, before we take this crop off sometime next fall. So fingers crossed. And I guess that's one of the things, that's another one of the asks we have for our federal government is we want the federal government to recognize that the Canadian economy cannot, and Canadian agriculture cannot afford to be in a tariff war with the two largest economies in the world at the same time, both as an overall economy to the Canadian economy as well as agriculture. So, the thing about this Chinese one, and I think it was alluded to earlier, we know what caused it. We know what they want. We know how we should negotiate. I think the government should signal to the Chinese that we're willing to negotiate with them and sit down and talk to them and maybe come up with some sort of solution. Americans, we need to come up with a solution with them too, but it's really hard to sort of tell what that solution is because Trump seems to change his mind hourly as to what the issue is and what he wants to get out of it. So it's really hard to negotiate without. And I think the easier one to go to is the Chinese and to talk to them and see where we can go with that.
But
Well,
Trump is already musing, Bob,
sorry, go ahead.
Trump is already musing a compensation package for the U.S. producer. I heard a little clip last night. It's my understanding when he brought tariffs in 2018, the U.S. farmer received $44 billion in compensation from the federal government in checks to help compensate them for the impact. I don't remember getting a check on our farm. I know Canada doesn't normally respond in that way, but I think that this is one of these points, to your point, Roger, where we're fighting on both fronts. The impact is going to be very significant. and there is definitely a case to be made for compensation signals. I mean, the other thing is, do you think there'll be third country leakage and some Canadian canola will still make its way over to China?
Well, I think there'll be some of that. There was back in 2019, although it was very small. There was a little bit that went into the UAE, and they increased their crushing facility or capacity, and sold a fair amount of oil and meal directly through the back door to them. But I think for the most part, their infrastructure is already tapped out. They don't have the ability to really do a whole lot more. And that's the challenge we have. It's not so simply, okay, China's not buying from us. Let's pick up the phone and phone Indonesia and see if they'll take it. It's the countries you're trying to sell to either has to have a strong enough dairy industry to take the meal, that's diversified enough, and that they need our product and are willing to pay for it. And the other part of what it is, if it's raw seed, they need to have the infrastructure there to crush it. And most countries don't have that kind of infrastructure. They're at least not anywhere near that size of what we're talking about in the Chinese market.
Well, and this is where the Trump administration is way out to lunch. They have the idea that if they quickly impose huge tariffs, the whole thing is going to move back. All manufacturing and everything will move back into the U.S. That can't be done overnight. But some of these industries, by the time they've retrofitted, we've got a new regime in the administration. I mean, you can't do this within 3 years' time. And so I think a lot of industries will just hunker down, and they'll wait it out. In fact, I heard this morning that a Boeing 787 is going to cost $30 million more because of the tariffs on aluminum and steel. So these industries just can't retrofit. The other thing that Trump doesn't realize is that his supporters are going to have to pay more, not just because of tariffs. I mean, we've talked about that many times, but also because if it's manufactured in the US, of course, the product is going to be more expensive than if they import it from China. And so you're even going to have a lot of pressure on Trump supporters on that front. So
Yeah, I
go
agree
ahead.
with you, Bob. I think that's one of the reasons that I think a lot of people have forgotten. Some of the reasons why those industries moved offshore in the first place was because the labor costs were higher on the continent than they were, in other places in Asia. And that's, part of the reason why some of this stuff moved. I mean, I understand Trump wanting to make sure that he's got critical infrastructure there that, to make critical things for the security of the United States. I totally get that. But I think honestly, they shouldn't be counting Canadians as part of that, worry, because if we have a good, strong relationship with our best allies, we are a reliable supplier that's not likely going to walk away from them in their time of need. We never have in the past, so if they don't need to move steel and aluminum all to their own country in fear of that Canada's going to walk away and not supply them if they ever became, in some sort of risk in the world. So I agree. That's something that they are not completely thinking through. There's certainly, even if they do manage to bring jobs back, they're exporting a lot of their employees, their low cost employees out of the U.S. He wants to expel them, and so that's going to drive up his labor costs even more if he's successful in moving 14 million people out of his country, like he's talking. And then, like you said, the reality that a lot of these companies are going to have to strand industries and infrastructure in other countries, which is going to have a cost to them for sure. So at the end of the day, it's going to cost the American consumer a lot of money,
Well, not
even though
only
they don't
that,
realize that.
exactly. And I mean, the administration will label everything as a national security issue, right? I recall going down to California to talk to a national farmers union meeting, and that was the time of country of origin labeling. And they insisted that country of origin labeling was a national security issue, which made no sense at all. We've touched on it a little bit, Roger. Diversification. I mean, yeah, I guess guys can plant something else while there's low canola prices and high tariffs. But again, you also mentioned that some of the other commodities have also weakened in price. Do you think you're going to see a huge movement? Well, you said for this year they've already prepared. They already have their cropping intentions in place, right? And of course, as you said, a year from now, who knows what'll happen.
You're right. Yep, absolutely. I think one of the things that we really are pushing our government to do is to send strong signals to our government to try and create a domestic biofuels market here in Canada. That's renewable diesel, and the other one is sustainable aviation fuel. Those have got the opportunity to take up some of our lost export market. It won't replace it, but it certainly has the opportunity. And nice thing about it is it comes with investment in our infrastructure. It comes with investment in crush facilities. It comes in investment in our refineries. It's got an opportunity to add value and jobs all the way down the food chain for the canola industry. And I think that's one of those. If we have a domestic market here, then we're not at the whims of a Chinese government or a tariff from the U.S. where they stroke of a pen suddenly kills our market here. That's something that we can control our own destiny domestically, and I think that's important for us. But certainly that is, not going to be the ace in the hole, but it's certainly a big help. I mean, we're working on, and we're really happy that we have an office in the Indochina region to start expanding those things. But again, those things take time. We have to develop and find markets that are willing to buy our products and have the infrastructure to be able to handle them. So it's not something we can expect to happen overnight. But certainly there is the need for to find new markets for us or to diversify our markets for sure.
Jack.
Well, I guess the question I have is when you start talking about east-west movement, it seems to me that we immediately start talking about pipelines and railroads, which I'm happy to talk about. I mean, where is the capacity of our rail system right now? Is it time to start double tracking instead of talk about it, to do it? Because I would love nothing better living in Northern Ontario to see our infrastructure get built up to better capacity so we can really move stuff east and west. Because right now that seems to be a long ways off. And I guess the other question, I read little tidbits about people musing about Churchill actually having some capacity being built there. Is that got any possibility as far as prairie product moving out through Churchill if they redid the rail bed? Money apparently is going in to do some preliminary work, I read, this year.
I'm not sure about Churchill. I haven't really followed with that, but I will say that I agree that I think we do have some challenges when it comes to our rail. Certainly, that's one of the things that has been expressed to us by the Japanese, for example, when I was over there in Tokyo earlier this year, is that they're concerned about the rail strikes that we had and that disrupted our movement. I think the latest number I heard was that there are 40 boats sitting in outside the port of Vancouver waiting to get loaded, and the railways have not been able to keep up with the demand for cars. So there is really, I think, room for a lot of infrastructure, national projects that need to be done. I mean, I think this is the situation where we need to take the opportunity and really start looking at some of the projects that need to be done. And I agree, pipelines are one of them. Natural gas facilities at both coasts should be another one. I mean, we had countries coming over to us asking us for our natural gas, and we turned them away. I think there was a real lost opportunity that we've had over the last 8 or 9 years because we've turned down all these big pipelines and we've turned down these natural gas opportunities. I think the other area, not only the rail that needs to be looked at and expanded, but our port facilities are not able to keep up with this stuff. So we really have the need for more infrastructure. I get frustrated when I hear about the government might pay people to sit at home. I think the government should be paying people to get on the way of building things here in Canada again. Build
Well,
pipelines east west,
I
build
certainly
natural gas facilities. Let's get more railways going. Let's expand these ports. Let's make sure that in 10 years from now, we are not reliant on the United States to take in 70% of our exports. Let's build facilities that at least gives us options. Maybe we'll end up selling back to the United States at that level, but we at least have options to go elsewhere. And the Americans can pay the price like everybody else does have to pay it.
Yeah,
Well,
Competition's
Roger, I
good
I think
think
for
there's
us.
lots of opportunity to go to Europe these days, and I do like the language coming out of some of the potential leaders. We'll see how the campaign goes, but talking about capital infrastructure and building east-west capacity, I think it's critically important. I agree with you. It's money, I think, poorly spent if compensation only is for people not to work and wait for your industry to recover. We've got to have opportunity for people to move within the country and move to good jobs that are building something that we need. So I'm 100% supportive of what you're saying.
Well, Roger, I think we need you in Ottawa, and there should be an opportunity over the next little while. Jack, you used to be in the Air Force. I
Yep.
know you probably have an idea for retaliation.
It's not a matter of retaliation as much as I've been doing a bit of reading on the F-35 question and looking at the cost of it, looking at the serviceability. The specs were supposed to be 90 to 95% serviceability. There were U.S. hearings on it only delivering about 30% serviceability. So one begs the question, why would you buy a U.S. airplane that's built in the United States, 80% of the money going down there? Yes, there are a few Canadian jobs. It only flies a third of the time. And a concern was, if you do have trouble with your neighbor, will you get the upgrades and the updates on that airplane so that it's an effective fighter? So I certainly have no trouble with looking once again at that contract and say, is the time right for us to look at another buyer? Saab was in the running. It was going to be built in Canada. It would have had jobs in Canada. So I think spending all of our money, no matter where it is, offshore, doesn't serve us well in the long term. Just about every country that has military expenditures tries to build the commodity you're building, whether it be a ship, an icebreaker, or whatever, in the country. You want to, if you're going to spend military money, you want to spend it on Canadians working hard to build the product. Otherwise, it's just a drain on the economy.
Well, you spun that pretty good, Jack. Anyway, I think we can close, but I'd like you to cut. The one thing I've noticed, and more than ever before, is look, 90% of Canadians are behind the government acting with decisiveness and making sure they protect Canadians, and that of course includes other industries, other sectors, but I mean, Canadians are behind farmers on this one too, and so that's really good to see. More than any other issue I've ever seen, everybody is behind this fight. Jack, you have anything else you would like to say? How about you, Roger?
No, I think I agree with the comments that came out today. So no, I agree with you for sure. I hope that the Canadian public stays behind agriculture. It's always a bit concerning because some of the stats I've seen in the last few years is that there's only 2% of the population in Canada that really have a connection to the farm anymore, and so 98% of them don't have an understanding. And if you extrapolate that information, that means that 98% of our MPs and MLAs throughout the country are a similar amount of understanding about agriculture. So it's important that we keep, in front of those people, and they're very good about wanting to understand and learn. Every time I've had an opportunity to talk to them, we just need them now to turn that into action and to support the industry, because I think food security, energy security for Canada is vital for us all the way through the entire Canadian economy.
Right
All
on.
right.
It was a pleasure to meet you, Roger. Take care.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you too, Jack. Thanks,
Thank
Bob.
you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, Roger Chevraux, former chair of the Canadian Canola Growers. Tells us now he's just a farmer, but you're never just a farmer. So we're going to see more of him, I'm sure, and Jack Wilkinson as well. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
All right, Aj.